is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is the Screen Watching Podcast. Big podcast this week. Simon's going to be talking about probably the most sort of bona fide hit that Netflix has ever really had on the platform. I mean, no one's really talking about it, but it's doing gangbuster numbers, and apparently it's quite good. But we'll hear what Simon thinks about Rebel Ridge, which is streaming now on the Netflix. Also streaming now is a documentary on Australian streamer Binge, but it's from HBO, and you can find that on Max in the US. It's called Wise Guy, David Chase and The Sopranos. I'm going to be doing a bit of a double tag with that documentary, which explores the behind the scenes of The Sopranos, with another documentary called After Baywatch, Moment in the Sun, which is on Hulu in the US and will be on Disney Plus next week. Look, two incredible shows from the 90s, and I can't wait to go deep into both of them. We're going to be doing some what else you've been watching. You'll hear us talk about things like The Taking, The Lie, Back to Paradise, Le Samurai, Down with Love, all the titles that you want to hear about. We've got an intermission. We're going to take a deep dive into the Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival, which I think Simon Foster may have a little bit of a personal dealing with. And of course, we'll have This Week in History and the birthday quiz. But the only way to get to all that is to go through the indignity of asking Simon Foster, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right, Dan Barrett. Screen watchers everywhere. Welcome to this week's podcast, episode 191. Those of you who are watching the video feed will see I'm a little bit frazzled. I'm a little bit manky in my appearance. When they look at you, they see a well-groomed, dapper man. You're like that every week.
So I haven't been for a shower yet this morning. I've got to get onto that.
You look good, but you're looking good, and that's what's important. I am in the final few days of preparing for our 5th annual Science Fiction Film Festival here in Sydney, and quite frankly, it's doing my head and other parts of my body in. But thank you for giving me a little bit of time in the middle of the show to rant on about it. It's an interesting program this year, and there's a lot of good reviews to talk about this year in the this week on the podcast. So I'm excited. Even if I don't look it.
Look, there's some interesting gear, and Simon, you've never looked more handsome, frankly. But look, let's dive right into let's talk about Rebel Ridge and the reviews.
It stinks.
Simon, this is an unexpected success movie, Rebel Ridge. It's exactly my bag. I haven't had the chance to watch it yet, but I think that's probably what's happening as soon as we finish recording this podcast. But Rebel Ridge, let's watch a clip, and then you can tell us all about it.
I need to report a crime.
And this was cash?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you just drive so smooth?
Big guy must weigh 250.
We're gonna hold on to this money.
I didn't get his badge number, but his last name's Marston.
You're gonna need to leave.
Next suspect number 2.
Rebel Ridge is a new film from a director called Jeremy Saulnier. He has done some incredible work in the past, but a lot of films that haven't really got the attention, things like Blue Ruin, Green Room. These are all films that have a real cult following, and they're really muscular bits of filmmaking, and he doubles down on that in Rebel Ridge. Aaron Pierre, who I didn't know by name, but as soon as I saw him, I recognized him as that guy, and that guy being from, I think he was in Lovecraft Country, if I'm trying to, Underground Railroad. He was in the film Old, the M. Night Shyamalan film. He plays a huge individual, a man with muscles upon muscles. He's an incredibly good-looking and physical actor. He turns up in this small town trying to bail out his cousin, who is being transferred between prisons, and he needs to get the bail money to stop this transfer because the cousin's got ties that are going to see him in a lot of trouble if he goes into the population. Along the way, he gets pulled over by 2 redneck cops. Turns out that this small town is taking advantage of the laws that permit them to take money from travellers if they think it's drug money. Now, he's carrying upwards of 30 grand on him, so they decide to, we're going to take this cash, which means the cousin's not getting the bail money, which means instantly the Terry Richmond character, Aaron Pierre's character, is in conflict with the police chief, a superbly played villain by Don Johnson. He has some of the best lines in this that he's had in his whole career. So as the convolutions start to take place, and Terry Richmond tries to get his money back, and the past that he brings with him of being a hand-to-hand combat expert in the Marines. Suddenly this small-town police force finds themselves up against this mighty man, this gentle giant, who doesn't want to hurt anybody, doesn't want to kill anybody, but he wants to see justice done, and he wants to help his cousin at any cost. What you have there is kind of a riff on the original First Blood film, the one in which Stallone turns up and Brian Dennehy is the police chief who's a bit of a dick, and all the other cops are kind of falling in behind him and suffer the consequences. And there are many sort of familiar elements from that film in this film. In this one, you also have the terrific Anna Sophia Robb, who was a child actor. You might remember her in Bridge to Terabithia and Return to Witch Mountain and some of those family films from a decade ago. She's grown up into being this really fine young actress who's a county law clerk who wants to help out Richmond in his journey to get his brother out, and in exposing the corruption of this small town police force, who's really got the whole sort of county around the throat in their corruption. So it's a pulsating film. It's got this soundtrack that sort of has a heartbeat to it that drives the film forward. Pierre's performance is so still that when he finally explodes, and boy does he explode, it is a total visceral sort of shock to the system. He's although he takes up a huge section of the screen with his shoulders and his huge ears and his piercing eyes, he's always very calm, so that when that eruption occurs, it's one of the great moments. And what really surprised about this was that the underlying emotional current is that he's doing all of this just to get his cousin out of jail becomes really the most important element in the last few minutes of the film. And spoiler alert, but I got a little weepy at the end of this, which I don't expect to do with a hillbilly sheriff meets tough ex-Marine kind of movie. I expected a whole lot of hard-boiled action and thrills. I didn't expect it to have the emotional punch that it does in the last few minutes. It's a really, really great film.
Yeah, look, this is very much my bag. Okay, so a couple of things. I'm just going to correct some of the casting sort of mentions you made through there. You mentioned the credits of our lead here and mentioned Lovecraft Country. You're getting confused with Jonathan Majors, who is the star of Lovecraft Country. Of course I am. Yes. Wasn't in that at all. No. And, if you're going to get someone confused with anyone, Jonathan Majors probably isn't the guy you want. That was a major slip up on my part, yes. No, I was thinking of Underground Railroad and I said Lovecraft Country, which threw me off. But you're absolutely right, yeah. Yeah. The other thing was you talked about Anna Sophia Robb, who's got a great first name. Anna Sophia, no hyphen. Just amazing. Beautiful young actress, lovely. You're missing the absolute number one sort of credit from her past. Like, this is the thing that really broke her out. She was the star of the Sex and the City's prequel series, The Carrie Diaries. The Carrie Diaries, yes. No, I didn't forget that. I just chose not to. No, I remember her very much as a child star in the Terabithia film. She did was it Because of Winn-Dixie, in which she played a little girl with a little dog? That was a sweet film as well. So, but she's grown into a really strong presence, and she absolutely holds her own opposite this mountain of a man. Yeah. Yeah, look, I'm definitely going to check this one out. And viewing numbers on this one have been incredibly strong, and I think I'm stealing a line from Scott Mendelson, I think, when I say this, but it just kind of shows that Netflix have made this big mistake of going after these big event movies. It seems like they keep on trying to think about what a big event movie is in, 2018 onwards, which is, movies like The Grey Man, like these sort of IP type movies, where what they really should be doing is thinking about, hey, what is it that people are being underserved in cinemas right now? And it's the thing that you and I keep calling for en masse, which is more of the sort of films that they used to think about as being programmers. Yep, the mid-level programmer. This to me, I could absolutely see this, as a cinema release, I could absolutely see this being a little film that creeps into cinemas, suddenly word of mouth is huge, and before you know it, whatever studio backs this sort of thing, they've got like a $70 million hit on their hands. So that's what I can see. That's exactly what you're saying, that Netflix should have a similar sort of foresight. That's it. And when you look at the movies that have done really well on Netflix, it is kind of those traditional programmers that are doing dramatically well. So more of this, please, and hopefully that's more of what we see going forward from Netflix. But Simon, let us instead delve into maybe not Netflix, but the world of HBO and its marquee titles show. This is the show that still defines HBO when everyone thinks about it. It's a show called The Sopranos, and this past week, there was a documentary called Wise Guy, David Chase and The Sopranos. And David Chase, for those who aren't aware, the creator of The Sopranos. It's a documentary as much about him as it is the show. Let's play a clip. We'll talk about it on the other side.
For years, everybody told me you should write a show about your mother and yourself. She was so out there.
Stop telling me how to live my life. You just shut up.
And I thought, who's going to watch that?
You're making me out to be some fucking mama's boy.
Then I realized maybe if he was a really badass guy.
Alright, so I said that we're going to talk about Wise Guy, David Chase and The Sopranos, but also we're going to talk about after Baywatch, Moment in the Sun, which is debuting on Disney Plus this week in Australia, but you can find it on Hulu in the US. And before we talk about David Chase and The Sopranos, I'd like to play a clip of After Baywatch.
Baywatch is a fantasy.
Baywatch was sexy.
Baywatch was the #1 show in the world. It was hot. When you hear that theme song,
I had no idea how much fun I was going to have.
It was addicting. People were just hungry. They were eating that stuff alive.
So this explains the red Speedos. I was wondering why you were doing that, and now I get the whole red Speedo thing. So do go ahead. It's distracting, but do go ahead.
Well, I mean, look, obviously we've got a video podcast and people aren't aware of the fact that I started in red Speedos and then I dressed up, but Simon will forever have that sexy, sexy image going forward. Yeah, scrub harder. Look, this week, well, within we'll say the course of a fortnight, we've been blessed with 2 documentary series about some big marquee TV programs.
Sure.
So The Sopranos absolutely defined HBO. They'd had some TV shows already, or some originals, which were fairly well known and notable. They had the Emmy Award-winning Larry Sanders Show in, I'm going to say about 91, I think they debuted. And that sort of, defined HBO for about 4 or 5 years there. They had Sex and the City in 1997. They had Oz in 1998. And then in 1999, they debuted The Sopranos. Now, to this day, you still think about The Sopranos quite heavily as part of the larger HBO brand. In recent years, they've been embracing more of the Warner Brothers side of the business, and you're seeing, obviously, the Game of Thrones was hugely successful for the last 10 years. But next weekend, we're going to be talking about, next week on the podcast, we're going to discuss The Penguin, which debuts on HBO. Now, 15 years ago, if you said there was a TV series based on a Batman villain as part of the HBO lineup, I would have said, you're drinking. Okay, but, it's absolutely happening now because that's kind of what HBO stands for. So, when HBO dedicated themselves to a documentary about David Chase and The Sopranos, okay, you know that they've got 2 things in mind here, which is, one, they want to have a documentary that people are going to be interested in that speaks to something which is integral to the HBO brand, which is The Sopranos. But also, they kind of want you watching The Sopranos again. This is one of these things where, yes, the objective is the program itself, but it's actually really there as an incentive for you to go, you know what, I really like that program. I'm going to dive back into the world of The Sopranos. And I think off the back of this, there are going to be a lot of viewers who are saying, you know what, I could do a rewatch of The Sopranos right now and burn through all 90-odd episodes of that program. And that's time well spent.
Sure.
What isn't time well spent is this documentary, David Chase and The Sopranos. If you're a Sopranos fan, I think you're going to absolutely eat this up. And Simon, I know that you've watched some Sopranos, not really a lot of it. Okay, but we'll get to your thoughts in just a moment.
All right, yes, let's do that.
Yeah. But when I was watching this, my general sort of thought was, this is a for the fans only production. There's a moment right at the beginning where David Chase sits down with documentarian Alex Gibney, who's running the documentary, and he says something along the lines of, if I knew this was about me, I wouldn't have done it. I thought it was just going to be about The Sopranos. I didn't realize I was the focus. Okay, and when you're watching it, I kind of had the entire different experience to David Chase when he was thinking about it, in that I feel if this was just about David Chase, and led into The Sopranos, that would be a way more interesting story than what's on here. Because what you've got, particularly in the first part, in the second part it becomes a little bit different. But in the first part of this two-part documentary, it's just this really awkwardly edited thing, which is more about evoking the spirit and interest in The Sopranos than it really is as an honest look at David Chase's life. And I appreciate that's what's being sold here, but the interesting stuff in this documentary is David Chase. I'm not a David Chase-ologist by any means. I don't really know that much about the guy. But what I do know is, and they touch upon this in the documentary, he's a guy who started out, I can't remember where he was from originally, went to Hollywood with the dream that he wants to become a film director. He ends up getting there, doesn't get any directing work. Instead, he finds himself as a TV writer. He works on the Rockford Files. He works on a bunch of TV shows sort of through the 80s, ends up leading into the 90s where he's the showrunner on Northern Exposure for the last couple of years of that program. He's done some other TV work as well, and he hated it. He absolutely hated being a TV writer. Did not care for it at all. Okay, he didn't like broadcast TV, didn't really like what it represented, and his dream was to direct movies. So he ends up thinking, hey, look, I've got this idea called The Sopranos. He takes it, originally it's a film script, couldn't get that made. He ends up taking the pilot version of it around to a bunch of networks, none of them interested. HBO come along saying, hey, look, we are interested in this. They say all the right things. They leave him waiting for about a year between filming the pilot to actually giving the show a green light. But anyway, the show eventually gets up and becomes the show that we know it as today. He ends up becoming a marquee name as a result of The Sopranos and runs that show. He loves running that show. Like, it kind of gives him everything he wanted from film, but it's on TV. Like, you know, ticks a lot of boxes for him. After that, he directs a couple of movies. None of them do very well. There's one with James Gandolfini in it called I'll Fly Away, I think is the name of the film. Something like that. I haven't seen it. Reviews weren't particularly great for it. Simon, you may have seen this movie. I'm not too sure.
No, I haven't seen this movie, no.
Yeah. But anyway, it just sort of came and went. And the one thing that would probably top off his career was in 2021, HBO produced Warner Brothers produced an original film called, and I've forgotten the name of it, which kind of really
The Saints of Newark.
The Saints of Newark, which is a Sopranos prequel movie. The character that James Gandolfini plays in The Sopranos, Tony Soprano, is a character in this as portrayed by Gandolfini's real-life son. So he's in this movie playing his father, and David Chase wrote the film and he'd planned to direct it, but he had some health issues, but his wife had some really severe health issues, which are ongoing. So he ended up stepping away from directing it, and I think he was a bit disappointed with that project, and it sort of stands as this sort of big, I guess sort of a blight on the legacy of The Sopranos, to the point where they don't even mention it in this documentary. And I've got 190 minutes. Like, there was plenty of time to talk about the Newark film, but never happens. And the arc of David Chase's life is pretty much wanted to be a director, fell into TV, fell into a huge TV success, and could finally sort of see his artistic sort of desire come to life by making a movie of this, and that fell through. That's a great documentary. Instead, this is basically, guy doesn't want to do TV, ends up doing TV. Hey, here's, 2 hours of the TV show he did, and here's the controversial ending to the TV show, and that's exactly where the documentary ends. It's really unfulfilling. It doesn't really tick anywhere near enough boxes as a fulfilling documentary in itself. It's essentially what they call an EPK, which is electronic press kit. It's a bunch of clips edited in to encourage you to try to watch something. And it's fine. As I said, the fans will really quite like this, I think. I thought it was a breezy, watchable 3 hours really, 2.5, I'm not sure what it worked out to. But it was just unfulfilling. But in the spirit of unfulfilling, we've also got After Baywatch Moment in the Sun, which is the honest version.
Can I talk about
one sec, we'll come back, Simon. Okay, After Baywatch is the honest version of the David Chase and Sopranos thing. This isn't made by any of the people involved in the program. I think it was the Disney-owned ABC end up producing it. It's basically a bunch of clips of interviews with Baywatch stars from yesteryear who were there talking about their memories of the show. Intersped with some clips of the program, and then also a couple of interviews with the lesser remembered stars of the program today, talking about how badly paid they were, and a couple of fairly honest stories about Jeremy. I'm going to say his name's Jeremy Jackson, the kid that played Hobie Buchanan. that guy, he talks about growing up on the program. He had a lot of issues with drugs and crime as he got a bit older in life. But he talks about stealing like the women's bathing suits and sniffing them and stuff. You know, it's all the sort of tawdry stuff you want. It's all a bit gross, but also it's Baywatch. Like, it all falls into the spirit of it. And the thing is, both the David Chase and the Sopranos documentary is just as watchable as the After Baywatch. But I would say, does After Baywatch need 4-hour-long episodes? No, it absolutely does not. Nor do David Chase and The Sopranos need to be 2 90-minute documentaries.
All right, let me just weigh in briefly. I've seen the first 90-odd minutes. I've seen the first episode of the David Chase documentary. I don't think enough credits is being given to the fact that it's an Alex Gibney produced documentary. I think there is a skill...
Because we get so few of them.
Well, he turns them out, but they're terrific documentaries. There's no denying that. With this one and the premise that he sets up of, and it's kind of cute, but it also kind of works, that he sits Chase down in a remodeling of the set that was the psychiatrist's office in The Sopranos, where we first meet Lorraine Bracco as Dr. Melfi and Tony Soprano. I should point out, I have a history with Sopranos. I still think the pilot episode for The Sopranos is one of the 2 or 3 great pilot episodes I've ever watched, and it impacted me instantly that this was a different kind of television show. The story of the ducks and the pool, which is mentioned in the documentary, as are key moments in a lot of the episodes that have become kind of iconic, and which speak directly to what you say about it being a bit of a greatest hits package to keep people coming back to having a look at the series. I get that, and I don't disagree with that at all. I did drop off in The Sopranos because this whole thing messed up my life called Children, and I just didn't get a chance to watch as much television as I would have, and that's right where The Sopranos... Where are your priorities? Oh, well, I know. I had to rethink a few things. So, having said that, I actually thought I'm giving it a little bit more credit for having a bit more balance than you did. I thought that the insight that Chase gave into himself as a boy growing up, and then the tough life he led, and then the trip to the West Coast to become a movie and then ultimately a TV guy... I thought that played into some of the intertwining characters and those key moments that they show from The Sopranos. And I thought it did give a real insight into what someone who's making a very personal version of their life in the form of a gangster story brought to The Sopranos. And that gave me... Maybe because this is all very new to me. I'm not a David Chase guy at all. I didn't know him... I only knew him as someone from The Sopranos, and I didn't know this much about him. Maybe this all seems new and fresh and interesting to me, and I can give it a bit more layer. I am keen to see the second episode, because the first episode doesn't deal with Gandolfini's death. It doesn't deal with how Chase dealt with the huge success of The Sopranos, or how the movie did or didn't make an impact. So... and I haven't seen any of the Baywatch one, which surprises me because you know my thoughts on women in bikinis. So I will be watching that at some point.
Look, absolutely. I mean, you definitely enjoy all 4 episodes of the After Baywatch. I think maybe, look, when I'm thinking about the issues with the David Chase and The Sopranos, if you think about what the objective is, which is to get people watching more Sopranos, maybe the problem's more an issue of structure. And at this, I lay the blame entirely at Gibney's feet because, you know,
do you think it is? Do you think they'd bother paying Gibney the big bucks and do you think Gibney would be the kind of director, a filmmaker for sale if it was just a pitch to extend the life of the subject matter?
Well, yeah, I mean, that may not be the creative reason he'd want to do it. If they came to him and said, hey, look, you know, we'd like a documentary about The Sopranos, would you be interested? David Chase is willing to sit with you, like, maybe he'd be totally up for it. I mean, I don't know, maybe Gibney's like a mad keen Sopranos fan. Yeah. Like, you know, there's all sorts of reasons why a person might want to do it. I doubt they'd say to him, hey, look, our secret objective is we want people to watch the program again. But, you know, and it's probably not the number one thing that they're actively thinking about when they commission it, but it's absolutely on their mind. Yeah. But... ultimately, when I'm thinking about this, what works for me is all the David Chase stuff. When it veers away from that, it starts to have less impact. If that's structured maybe instead of 2 90-minute films, instead it becomes like After Baywatch and is 4 one-hour installments, each hour of that installment looking at something else, one of them being the life of David Chase, another one being the conflicted relationship that James Gandolfini had with his fame and then leading to his eventual death. Like, that'd be interesting. Another one which talks about the writers on the program and their experiences working with David Chase and how that sort of shaped their careers, because there's a bunch of writers from The Sopranos that are actively interviewed through this as well, which is definitely the thing that holds the documentary together. Like, they become the actual through line. But, you know, give them an hour. And then maybe the final hour becomes talking about the other cast members, like Drea Di Matteo, who plays Adriana. She's given a lot of screen time in this as well. Also, Michael Imperioli, who's a very loyal HBOist, he's on board as well.
It's great seeing those audition tapes too. It's really terrific seeing the young Imperioli and the young
absolutely
the guys.
Like, that
do
could be an hour
stuff
in itself. Like, maybe it's just an issue of structure, but as it currently stands, it's just unfulfilling because, you know, it just kind of chops and changes, and the thing that's supposed to be carrying it through just ends up being diluted by the rest of it.
Where do we watch all these shows? So, Wise Guy David Chase in The Sopranos is on Max in the US and one of the streamers here in Sydney, isn't it? In Australia?
In Australia, Simon. Australia is bigger than just Sydney. I know it's hard to believe. But yeah, it's on Binge here in Australia, and the After Baywatch documentary series, the hard-hitting After Baywatch Moment in the Sun, can be found on Hulu in the US and Disney Plus next week here in Australia.
Nice one.
Next, shall we just do a bit of what else have you been watching?
Yeah, let's rattle through that.
Yeah, cool. So, Simon, look, question without notice. What have you been watching?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Two things this week that are a little bit off-centre. Wasn't a big week of TV or movie watching for me with the whole festival stuff going on, but I did get to watch a 70-minute documentary on the Criterion channel. It's called The Taking. Now, this is from a director called Alexander O. Felipe. Now, if you don't know him, then you're not a real mad film buff, because he has made a series of documentaries about the impact of cinema on our culture that are some of the must-watches of the genre. By that I mean 7852 is the breakdown of the shower sequence in Psycho, and Felipe turned that into an incredible documentary that ran for over 90 minutes. He did Memory, The Origins of Alien. He did Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist. He did Lynch Oz just a couple of years back, which was a major cinema release, and is terrifically insightful film about the creative impulses of David Lynch. And with The Taking, which is a film he made back in 2021, I think, he has taken the iconic forms of Monument Valley in America and examined how it's been used by filmmakers such as John Ford, and Preston Sturges and those sort of people who sort of shaped the early years of cinema, and how they took command of that scenery and made it Hollywood's, ultimately at the expense of the indigenous population, its sovereign Navajo land, but it came to embody all of the Wild West adventures. So many films were shot there, from Stagecoach to Red River to... And it looks at how this incredibly iconic bit of American geography infused an entire genre style, the Western genre, when Westerns were at their height. He cuts together these amazing images. He uses some really clever narration. He uses archival footage of John Ford, of John Wayne, of Peter Bogdanovich talking to a notably cranky John Ford. And it's just one of those great sort of behind-the-scenes documentaries that only Alexander Felipe does so well. So it's called The Taking. Yes, I know, it's only on the Criterion channel, so you have to be able to get that to watch it. But it's definitely worth a look if you're a film buff of any note.
Look, sure, Simon, it sounds interesting, but frankly, my time's really spent with After Baywatch Moment in the Sun.
I can see why it would be a stretch to tear you away from that, to tear you away from the sexy types.
I've only got so much emotion to give.
What else have you been watching, by the way?
Look, I've been watching... this felt more like obligation than me actually wanting to watch it, but I sat down to the new Australian take on... I don't know how much you're into your British crime drama of the week, like whether it's your Midsummer Murders or whatever.
Yeah, no,
okay,
not really.
But,
some, not much.
Yeah. Back to Paradise is it Back to Paradise? Is that the name of the show? I've suddenly found myself with like a little brain thing. It's not Back to Paradise. It's
a Murder in Paradise. Isn't that a thing?
It's not called a Murder in Paradise.
With the comedian guy and the
Death in Paradise.
Death
in Paradise.
Yeah. That's such a generic name, but I guess that makes it easy, makes it palatable, as they say.
Yeah, look, so Death in Paradise, hugely successful show. Like, it's an absolute monster success of a program. Now, I don't think it gets anywhere near as much credit as being a success as it is. It's run for, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 seasons now, maybe even more than that, 11, 12. It's been going a while. There's a spin-off series called Beyond Paradise, which debuted a few years ago. But this is the third spin-off of sorts from it, in that it's a spin-off without any characters or any actual connection with it beyond the word paradise in the title. We've got this new program called Return to Paradise, which is an Australian set version of Death in Paradise. Okay, here we've got, and I'll read the logline, D.I. Mackenzie Clark, so yes, it's a former Australian, gone to the UK, come home again story. D.I. Mackenzie Clark's forced to leave London under a cloud of suspicion and returns to the last place she never wanted to be, her hometown of Dolphin Cove, Australia, where her tenacity and work ethic help her solve murder mysteries. So, much as in the UK version of it, you've got someone who is an outsider of sorts, who is in a gorgeous looking place that they don't want to be, and then every week they have to solve a murder mystery. They work with the local police, and the mystery gets solved, and next week they're on to another one.
Wow.
Ultimately,
who'd live in Dolphin Cove with all these murders going on? It sounds like the crime capital of the world.
No, exactly. Look, the issue I had with this one is, I mean, you know what you're going to get with it. I was really just watching it out of obligation just to see, how's the Australian one going to be set up? And, every so often you kind of watch something and you go, you know what, that was actually kind of charming. I wouldn't mind sticking with it. I didn't make it to the end of this episode. And the reason I didn't make it to the end is because, and it all sort of fell apart in this one sequence pretty early in, which is D.I. Mackenzie Clark ends up knocking on the door of a place where I presume she's going to rent a house or something, but the murdered person in the pilot episode is a real estate agent. Anyway, she gets there, finds there's a detective who's interviewing the last person that saw the real estate agent, and then she gets there, and then there's this really just dumb sequence with her walking around like this house with this police officer, detective already in the house, and she's going around and she's like, there's no crime scene here, so the person didn't die here. And she's doing all these sort of Sherlock Holmesian sort of detective work to work out that a person didn't die there and that guy was investigating.
Did she go around eliminating all the locations where someone didn't die until she finds it? That's a lot of work to do. That's a slow way of going about solving a crime.
Like, it just sort of seems like this really silly thing where, like, the way that conversation really works is her saying, there's no one here, so you're alone, so I guess he didn't die here. Like, what happened? Like, that's what a human being would do. Instead, they give her, like, this really grand thing where she's sort of running around the house, looking at elements, going, wait a second, what's going on here? It is really dumb, and just spoke to how dumb this program continues to be for the next, it's like 55 minutes, I think the episode goes for.
Wow.
Just a chore of a program. Anyway, I wasn't into any of the cast of it. I wasn't into the beautiful setting. Like, it's fine. It just looked like generic Australian beach. It'll probably play well overseas, but as an Australian production, I can see this going down the road.
All right. Ask me the question.
Okay. Simon, what else have you been watching?
All right. I watched a true crime documentary. They're a dime a dozen on the streaming platforms, but one that is gaining a lot of...
Sorry, Simon. What's more generic, the true crime documentary these days or a Death in Paradise style police cop procedural?
Oh, I can feel an intermission coming on. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. But I would say the true crime documentary, the way they're slapdash put together, at least you've got to sort of do costuming with a beach cove murder mystery. But anyway, I digress. Sure. The Lie is the story of Grace Mullane, a British backpacker who and traveller who was on her OE, which I hadn't heard that phrase before, but it's her overseas expedition, sort of like the gap year that the British do. And she had travelled the world, ended up in New Zealand, where she met a young man whose name I won't put on the podcast because of the actions he ultimately undertook with young Grace. But what this true crime documentary does is piece together the police investigation into this young man and his actions against Grace by way of the security footage that were placed around the main New Zealand city where it all took place. Double down on that with extensive police interview room footage. And you have a really sort of compelling story that shows how modern policing is able to track the actions of a young man performing a horrible crime, as well as warn young women in general, that these toxic men with evil intentions are all amongst us and can be a threat at any given moment, any given time. This happened through a dating app, but it can come up in any sort of form that these horrible actions take place. It's a really powerful documentary, and although it is cut together with black and white CCT footage, some static camera work inside the interview room, and then as the court case unfolds, the way it ends with women all around the world sort of focusing in on what happened to Grace and saying no more violence, stop the violence against women. It was central to the Me Too movement and the rising up against sexual and social abuse against women. It's a really potent, powerful documentary, much better than what we usually see dropping on the streamers, which are often just sort of cut together, hacked together bits of loud music to give you a fright when you don't really need, when the really frightening things are what's happening right in front of us. So it's called The Lie. It's doing big numbers on Netflix, and certainly worth a look.
Really quickly, I'm just going to wind this out. So a couple of nights ago, I needed to get out of the house for too many hours. So I went to the local retro theatre, the Ritz Randwick, and I decided to settle in for a double feature of movies that I'd seen before. I went and saw Le Samurai, the 1967 neo-noir crime film with the recent late great Alain Delon. Went and saw that, followed by the... what year did this even come out? I'm going to say like 2002 rom-com Down with Love, starring one Ewan McGregor and one Renee Zellweger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Anyway, great night out at the movie, Simon.
Down with Love, I've loved Le Samurai, one of the great films. Alain Delon is the most handsome man who's ever been in front of a camera. Down with Love, it took me a couple of goes to watch it. The first time I watched it, it was
too complicated?
No, not at all too complicated. It seems so twee and so much... And I know they were trying to do like a 1950s Tony Randall style thing, like how to get ahead and succeed in advertising and all that sort of films from that era. But... I just found it just too cutesy and too twee. Second time I watched it, I kind of go, I get what you're doing here. It's cute and funny. Renee Zellweger is lovely in that film. So, really, what did you go and see that for? How long did you have to be out of the house for? Did she have a book club or something?
No. I'll explain it later. Look, we don't need to get into why I had to leave the house. It's nothing sort of too weird. Just not necessarily a conversation for the podcast, I don't think. First of all, Le Samurai, I'd never seen it on the big screen, and there's this big 4K restoration that's been going around.
Wow.
It's actually been, they ran it for a little while at Ritz Randwick, and I think it was playing at their sister cinema in Melbourne as well. I think it was nearing the end of its run. They were just doing one session a day, sort of in the late afternoon. But then Alain Delon passed away, so I think they just continued it running. When I went there, and this has been running at that theatre now for about a month and a half, there was still 9 people seeing it at a session at 4:40 on a Tuesday afternoon.
Speaking of 9 people going to a session, let's talk about My Science Fiction Film Festival.
Oh, can we?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's intermission time.
All right, so very kindly, Mr. Dan Barrett, producer of the show, and really the driving sort of force behind everything we do here, has handed over to me the intermission segment, in which I'm going to have a bit of a spruik about the Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival, which starts September 20, runs to September 22, which is about a week away as we record this. It's something that I work on all year, getting films from all over the world to screen here at the Event Cinemas George Street. This year has been a little bit different, Dan, because the films that I started to receive were not the usual ray guns and spaceships kind of science fiction, which I love, but they're far more introspective, they're far darker, they're far more personal stories, often, well, all of them with a speculative cinema or science fiction bent to them, but very often ones that reflect a really personal taste, and this is certainly the most personal program that I've put together. Notably from the opening night, in which I'm screening 2 films that have a dog theme to them. Just indulge me 1 second, I'll tell you why that's the case. Every year we give out the Adam Lee Memorial Award. He was a gentleman, a friend of mine who passed away 4 years ago. And every year we honour someone who's been central to, dedicated their life to working in science fiction or genre cinema or genre storytelling. This year we're giving it to the late Lee Gambon, our first posthumous award we're giving out. Lee was also a young man who passed away in Melbourne earlier this year. He was a curator and author whose love for classic genre cinema was infectious. He ran the Cinemaniacs team down in retro screening series down in Melbourne, wrote great books on Cujo and The Howling and Christine. And his passion in life, other than old movies and his friends, were dogs. He was an animal welfare advocate. We have an official charity as part of this year's festival called Pets of the Homeless, which was Lee's charity that he was associated with down in Melbourne. And that led me to, very fortunately, we got 2 films that were submitted as part of the festival that had a dog theme to them. We have a long short called The Reclaimers out of the UK, which is about an alien invasion in which only a dog can see the alien invaders. And we have the world premiere of an Australian film called Heel, which is about a farmer who loses his best mate, his dog, but is given the opportunity through a time travel device to maybe return to be with his best buddy. Bring your tissues for that one. It's a mini feature. It runs for like 50 minutes, but it's a stunning film. And then on top of that, Lee's favourite film was Chomps, the 1979 canine home mechanical protection system, the Robo-Dog romp from 1979, which starred Valerie Bertinelli. We're screening that on the Saturday morning at 10:30. So there's a bit of a dog theme running through it, which I'm kind of happy with, because you're a dog guy, Dan.
Look, I'm a dog guy, so... Look, every year you usually run one retro film as part of this festival, and it always makes me think, oh gosh, I want to get along to this. This year I would usually get along to it, but I have no relationship with Chomps at all. And I saw that guy, I've kind of heard of that movie, but I just don't really know it. But then I was having a chat with a mutual friend of ours, Chris Yates, former co-host of one of my mini podcasts. And he heard about Chomps and is like, oh my God, Chomps is playing, and I think he'll definitely be along for that night.
That's what I found. I mean, look, I've got to be honest with you, I didn't have much of a relationship with it either. I remember it vividly, being a few years older than you, and it was certainly a cinema release and a big holiday attraction when it first came out, but it didn't have any lasting... the phrase that you like to use is cultural cachet, and that's true of Chomps, but it turns out that it's adored by a lot of people. The response I've had from us Gen Xers to a screening of Chomps, they're like, oh my God, you're screening Chomps, I can't believe it. So hopefully I'll have a bit of a turnout to that. Across the rest of the program, though, things get a little dark and, like I say, a little more personal in the way I chose the films this year. It's not that I didn't have options for big special effectsy type films, and we do have one of those in there at 6 o'clock on Saturday called UFO Sweden, which was a blockbuster in its homeland 18 months or so ago.
I'll say I saw the blurb for this and I read that. It definitely sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. It's about a young girl whose father may or may not have been alien abducted, and she gets a local UFO group together to try to find out what exactly went on. And it goes into very sort of Spielbergy, Amblin entertainment from the 80s kind of places with its visuals. It's a terrifically entertaining film and perfect for a 6 o'clock Saturday night. But before that, we're screening The Complex Forms, which is an Italian film shot in stunning black and white about a villa in the middle of nowhere where elderly men go to prepare for what may or may not be their final moments, but it turns out the people who run this villa are actually a conduit for aliens who are coming to Earth, and one of the elderly men will be given to them as a sacrifice. So it's about more mortality, it's about understanding the joys of life when it's about to be taken away from you, plus it has got these giant alien, it's like these cockroaches as big as a car, designed by H.R. Geiger. So the way this film looks is absolutely stunning. It's one of two black and white films. At 1 o'clock on Sunday, or 12:30 on Sunday, we've got Love and Work, which is a really sort of dark comedy about a future world where work has been banned. And if you want to be a real rebel and get a 9-to-5 job, you got to do it in secret and work a mundane existence. It's such a funny film. Very US indie. It's directed by a guy called Peter O's, who did Jessica a few years ago. But it's a really terrifically funny film. The film I really need to talk about, two films I want to touch on briefly. Our closing night film is the new work from Luke Spark, who had a huge hit a couple of years ago with the Occupation films, Occupation and Occupation Rainfall. They travelled the world and made a lot of money for him, and he invested a lot of that back into this two-hander that all takes place under a major city that's been invaded by an intergalactic force. It's a one-shot movie starring Jamie Costas and the young Australian actress-singer Amelia, and it's a 90-minute film all done in one take, and it's one of the really great sort of creepy monster movies I've seen in a long time.
I'm surprised he's not doing another Occupation.
He'd probably get around to it because both of those were big hits. I couldn't tell whether you were being sarcastic there.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, they were both, and they improved with each one. The first one was a good film, a good sort of B-movie adventure, but the second one had a lot of oomph and a lot of sort of polish to it. So, and they both travelled well. But he has sort of gone back to his Queensland film industry culture and embraced the techies and the crew and cast there to work with his people. So good on him for doing that. I'm going to finish this up very quickly. We've also got a great short film program screening at 1 o'clock on Saturday with a whole lot of Aussie shorts. Do get along to that. At 9 o'clock on Saturday night, we are screening a film called Black-Eyed Susan. This is easily the most controversial film we've ever screened at our festival in 5 years. The session has a self-imposed R rating, which we will be administering strictly. This is the story of a sex android that has been created to become a sentient being while serving the needs of men who feel they have to abuse women. The film opens on a scene of terrible sexual violence and progresses with the character as her AI starts to form emotions and responses to this kind of violence, all in the service of capitalism. She's being built and constructed so that the philosophy of the company doing this is that if we can provide these androids to men who have these urges, then these men won't take this out on real women. And that's a valid point. But when the androids themselves start to develop emotional responses, what responsibilities do we then have to the robots? And it paints this bleak, shocking, but really thoughtful sort of version of the future and what AI is going to mean going forward. It is absolutely not an easy watch, and I totally understand if there'll be walkouts or if there'll be some controversy about the content of here, because taken out of context, it is truly shocking. Within the context of the story, it's really quite brilliant and fearlessly made by an American filmmaker called Scooter McRae. So that's our Saturday night film. I don't want to end on a downer, but that film is kind of indicative of some of the more personal films that we have screening and some of the sort of darker films we're screening as part of this year's Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival. So, hey, come along and have a good time this week.
Look, there sounds like some great titles in there. I'm pretty keen to get along to some. Now, curiosity, and this was posed to me from a few people that got along to some of the films in Brisbane last year at the Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival. Is the festival this year only in Sydney? What's the deal with that?
At this point it is. We will be running both a Melbourne and a Brisbane season early in 2025 if all things go to plan. But the way things worked out this year and just some personal stuff going on with me, I couldn't commit to a Brisbane session in 2024. But we're going to roll a lot of these films into both a Melbourne and a Brisbane season in the first quarter of 2025.
Okay, so watch this space.
Yeah, watch this space, yeah. And thank you, everyone, for your support. This is our 5th year doing the festival, and I know we get a lot of the people who listen to the podcast here in Sydney along to the festival. They always come up and say hi, so come along, come and get your ridiculously overpriced T-shirt with the beautiful artwork this year from Dan Berghofer, who's a graphic artist who's done our work this year. And a big shout-out to Sage Brown, who I know listens to the podcast and who cut our trailer. She's done amazing work. So go to all our Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival.com.au or our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and so on and so forth to find out more about the program.
Okay, look, I think we've had enough sort of self-indulgence. Let us move on to our House of Games. Simon, the highlight of my week is to do This Week in History, so please indulge me. What's happening this week in history?
Yes, I know you do text me very early on a Monday morning to find out what this week's House of Games questions are. So let's get into it. September 15, 1977. Alongside MASH, this was the most popular TV acronym title of the 1970s. It debuted on this day. Name the series. September 15, 1977.
Look, this has me feeling really, really stupid because the only thing I can think of is WKRP in Cincinnati, and that was like a 78, 79. So it's not that. I can't think of any other big acronym titles. What is this?
If I said the name Ponch, Eric Estrada, might you get...
Of course.
It's CHIPS, Californian Highway Patrol.
Yeah.
Which it's still called. It was officially their title before the series, but so there you go. September 16, 1972. We're really in a 70s thing at the today. One season wonder Bridget Loves Bernie, starring David Burney and Meredith Baxter, before she became Meredith Baxter Burney, and well before she became a lesbian, still holds what dubious broadcast record?
For the life of me, I'm really not too sure. Obviously, they got married, and and then divorced. I'm not sure what the dubious broadcast record would be.
You give up?
Yeah, I'm giving up.
Okay. Despite excellent ratings, it was actually the highest rated new show of the 1972-73 season. The show was cancelled after only one season. It still remains the highest rated show ever to be cancelled by the network. The official reason that the network gave was that it was scheduled between two huge hits, All in the Family and The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and it didn't match those ratings. So they said, you're gone out of there. So what a way to go. You actually perform with numbers like that, but then you're gone. Cutthroat.
Yeah, so what's the unofficial reason?
No, I know.
Because usually what would happen was that they'd just move it to another night.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it had the stink about it. They didn't want to do it. Maybe David Burney's just a dick. They didn't want to work with him. I don't know. Is he still with us? I hope not. I know he listens. He used to anyway. September 18, 1983. Whose faces did we see unmasked for the first time on MTV? Now, this is right in your zone. 83, you had barely been born. I was already 40. But can you remember whose faces did we see unmasked for the first time on MTV?
Look, I've got an answer here that feels kind of correct, but also, to my mind, this is maybe just too early for them to be unmasked. But would we be talking about Gene Simmons and the guys from Kiss?
It is the guys from Kiss. Can you name all four of them? I think we've done this before on the podcast, but it makes for good listening.
I'm sure that it doesn't, and no, I cannot. I can name Gene Simmons, and that's about it.
Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, Paul Stanley, Peter Criss. There you go.
Paul Stanley, I know. Yeah.
That was the one. Okay, yes. So that is the end of This Week in History, which, of course, traditionally, as has happened in the past, which is what we mean by traditionally, the birthday quiz.
No, not happy birthday. No, not that. Please, no, not happy birthday.
All right, Dan Barrett. Look at those beautiful faces that we've got. That is one of the nicest bits of graphic Canva work I've done. For those of you who don't know, I'm really good at Canva. September 17, 1931, Anne Bancroft. September 20, 1934, Sophia Loren. God, the golden years. September 21, the dashing Luke Wilson, and September 21, 1950 funny man Bill Murray. What on earth could these four very disparate individuals have in common?
Look, I mean, immediately when I look at the list, I can look at a Luke Wilson and a Bill Murray and think they've both got in common one Wes Anderson.
Yes, that's part of the answer, but not the answer.
Yeah, well, I get that. So this is kind of where I'm struggling a little bit, because I can't really work out a connection between any of these people to Anne Bancroft and Sophia Loren. Yeah, no, I'm going to have to pass on this one.
All right. Let me put it this way. Luke Wilson is part of an acting dynasty. He has brothers, Owen and Andrew, with whom he co-starred in films like Bottle Rocket and The Royal Tenenbaums and The Wendell Baker Story.
Yeah.
So, worked with his brothers. Bill Murray, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, so Brian Doyle Murray, John Murray.
And John Murray in Scrooged, Brian Doyle in a lot of films, Caddyshack and Scrooged and
Like
The
every
Razor's
movie
Edge,
ever.
Groundhog Day, the whole lot. So, we're talking about blood relatives here. Sophia Loren, she played the title role in the 1984 TV movie Aurora, in which she acted alongside her 11-year-old real-life son, Eduardo Ponti, a young man who's...
This all feels like a pretty big reach here, Simon Foster.
Wait till we get to Anne Bancroft. And Bancroft, of course, was married to Mel Brooks, with whom she co-starred in To Be or Not to Be and Silent Movie.
This is a marriage
and their
relationship.
Son Max Brooks wrote World War Z, and I think that brings us to the end of the birthday segment. Good night, everyone.
That should bring us to the end of this birthday section forever, frankly.
Nah, that was a good one. That
is not a good one, Simon.
That was It started well with the Wilsons and the Murrays. Yes, all right. And Sophia Loren is in there as well. It's a blood relative. I know the Anne Bancroft is a bit of a stretch. It was a tough week for birthday people. There wasn't that many. That took a lot of work.
Stretch.
Hey, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of the Bill Murray and Brian Doyle Murray's Extra Innings reality television series? They made it for Facebook Watch. Now, is that still a thing?
No, it's not. I mean, Facebook Watch isn't still a thing. That ran for, I think, just a couple of episodes. It
ran for a 10-episode first season, and then and it debuted on November 2017, where they go around to minor league baseball parks and baseball teams and get involved with the small community that run these minor league baseball. I never heard about it. Why did I never hear about this? I love the Murrays. I love baseball. I'm going to... Without Facebook Watch, where do we see this now?
I think it's gone for the ages.
Oh, don't tell me that.
Like, take a look at YouTube. Things just seem to crop up there. You might just find it being uploaded somewhere, maybe.
It's called Extra Innings. Hey, that's been a good podcast. Thank you, mate. Are we done?
Yeah, I think we're done. Folks, this has been a Screen Watching podcast. As always, if people want to find me outside of the confines of your ear holes, you can check me out at alwaysbewatching.com. It's a daily newsletter which has all the big breaking news stories in TV, streaming, and film, usually with a streaming bent. Within the Always Be Watching newsletter, there's always the weekly Always Be Streaming, which is a TV guide of all the new TV shows and streaming movies that debuted that very week.
You can find my writings over screen-space.net. What a lot of people don't realise is that Screen Watching came about because we combined the names of Always Be Watching and Screen Space. It's a true story, and that was that was all those years ago. Good memories as we near our 200 episodes. Don't forget, next week, the Sydney Science Fiction Film Festival is on at Event Cinemas George Street. Check their website and my website to find out everything about that. And everything Screen Watching at Screen Watching Podcast on the Facebook. We've got a Threads. Is that a channel? It's not a channel, it's just a page. We've got YouTube, of course, and screenwatchingpodcast at gmail.com for all your rants and raves.
If I can give another plug for my Always Be Watching newsletter, if people sign up, like let's say that you're not subscribed to it, in which case, shame on you. But if you're one of these people, it means that on Monday you're going to miss out on my Emmys pre-show blurb, where I try to predict the winners and say who probably should have won. I think pretty much across the board, everyone who's going to win working on the TV show The Bear. I think that's pretty much a lock.
Yeah, it's got a lock on everything.
If you work on the shows Shogun or The Bear, you're pretty much going to be walking home with an Emmy that night.
And you're good with your predictions. I mean, you did say that Donald was going to win the debate and not Kamala, but that's just the way you lean. But I think you'll be much better at the Emmys.
history will show. Yeah.
All right.
Simon Foster, let's get out of here. Folks, this has been Screen Watching. We'll be back next week with more of this nonsense. We'll see you then.